So welcome back, everyone, to Funeral DNA, the podcast where we analyze the unique components, trends, and innovations that make up the funeral industry. We call it Funeral DNA. I'm Mike Davis.
And I'm Ashley Salomon.
And today we have on with us Mr. Charles Chafer. He's from Celestis Memorial Spaceflight. So thank you for stopping on today, Charles.
Pleasure to be with you both.
Okay, so Charles, just tell us a little bit about yourself and your background, and how did you start with Celestis?
Well, I'm a child of the 50s and 60s, which means that I was raised at a time when exploring space was the most important thing that humanity did. It's kind of hard to picture that now, but growing up, we would view test launches in our elementary school classroom. It was that significant. So naturally, over the years, as with anybody, as the space program sort of wound down after Apollo, I didn't pay as much attention to it. But while a student at Georgetown in the mid-70s, I ran across a professor in Princeton named Gerard O'Neill, who kind of opened my eyes and several other people's eyes that the future of humanity really can be a multi-planetary or off-Earth experience. Now, being in the Foreign Service School and not a technical person, I got interested in all of the non-technical aspects of space, which led me directly to a gentleman in Houston, Texas, who founded a company called Space Services Inc. in 1981. And in 1982, we launched the first private rocket into space. We were sort of Elon Musk before Elon Musk. And I've never had a real job since. I've always been pursuing dreams and commercial space activities.
Well, you know, it's nice to hear that you had those dreams sort of growing up, and you're able to hop onto those dreams as you became an adult and into your employment life of the employment part of your life. So that's really good.
So the services that you're able to provide now, still sending DNA and ashes into space, are those the services that you were always providing from the start, or have you had any changes?
Well, Celestis actually got founded. A precursor company got founded when we were doing the rocket business, and they actually approached our president, who was Deke Slayton, one of the original Mercury astronauts, and Deke loved the idea, so we agreed to launch them. At that point, for a variety of reasons, I think mostly because it was too early, they didn't succeed. So when I was looking around for something to do in the mid-90s, I remembered how popular the concept was when it was announced in the early 1980s. So we began the company in 1994. We started out by just offering our orbital memorial space flight. And over the years, we've progressed to where we now offer 4 kinds of missions. We have a mission called Earthrise, which basically follows the trajectory of the early Mercury astronauts up and down, and reaches space, exposes our flight capsules, which handle the individual cremated remains or DNA, to a little bit of microgravity, and then parachute back to Earth to create a flown keepsake, which we return to the families. Our orbital service is just what it sounds like. We launch multiple capsules in a single spacecraft into Earth orbit, and the spacecraft remains in Earth orbit for anywhere from a few years to a few hundred years, depending upon the trajectory of that orbit. And loved ones can track the spacecraft real time and see, hey, grandma's going overhead tomorrow night. And it's kind of cool. At the end of the orbital lifetime, the laws of physics dictate that the spacecraft re-enters the atmosphere and burns up in entirety upon re-entry. So we characterize it as an ashes to ashes service, if you will. Then in 1999, NASA approached us and ask us to help them celebrate the life of one of their most famous scientists, Dr. Eugene Shoemaker, who actually has a comet named after him, but also taught the Apollo astronauts what rocks to look for when they were on the moon. And so together with NASA, we provided our first Luna service, where we impacted Dr. Shoemaker's ashes on the south pole of the moon, where they'll remain forever. We have another lunar mission. So that created our Luna service. Our next lunar mission is scheduled for later this year, where we'll soft land 69 folks on the surface of the moon. And then finally, we have our Voyager service, which is a deep space mission, defined as going out beyond the moon and essentially becoming another planet on its own. Our first one of those missions will be 2022, next year it is now, and that includes Star Trek creator Gene Roddenberry, his wife and actress Majel Barrett Roddenberry, Scotty, the Jimmy Doohan of Star Trek, hence the name Enterprise Flight. And that's our fourth service. So we offer four, we've developed them over the course of our 27, 28-year history as a company.
That's amazing. It sounds like a beautiful way to remember a loved one.
It is.
So off the top of your head, do you know how many space flights that your company has been a part of today?
We've done 17 missions as of January of this year. We have 2 more scheduled for this year, and then we have 4 more on the books in the next couple of years. So we'll hit 20, 22 in the next couple of years. The pace of our service is increasing to where we used to do 1 every year or 2 years, and now we're doing multiple missions per year. And I think that reflects really 3 things. The first is that it's easier to get to space as a commercial vendor these days. Thank you, Elon Musk. Thank you, Jeff Bezos. Thank you, Richard Branson, for providing easy ways, relatively easy. Space is never easy, but more routine, reliable access to space. The second is the growing cremation rate in this country. When we started our business, it was about 20%. Now, in about 5 years, it'll be 80%. And it's nearly 100% in Japan. And we are a global provider. So as people choose cremation more and more, naturally, we'll have more and more folks choosing us. The final and most important thing, I think, is the trend toward what I call alternative funerals. And that's basically baby boomers making choices for themselves and their parents and everybody after us that are different. We, as you know, because of this podcast that you do, there you can become a diamond, you can become a tree, you can become a reef, you can be launched into space, you can send your DNA. It doesn't have to be cremation. And as a result of that, people are choosing that more and more. The tradition of being buried in the family plot next to grandma, while it still exists for some people, the choices are so much vaster these days that people are choosing those.
Okay, so that's good now to know sort of why people are choosing that. And I understand you're right. A lot of families have changed where they move. So the idea of that whole family plot and everybody being together, it's definitely not as plausible in certain cases as it used to be, with, people moving for work and, going around. You talked about Schumacher going into the moon there, and then obviously the Star Trek people who would be very, very wanting to be involved with a service like this. Who is interested, aside from those type of people? Who are your target market, or who's interested in this type of service? Who's reaching out to you?
It's really amazing. I think it ranges from the people that have loved space and science and the space program, to the people that have loved science fiction, to the folks I call New Agers, who just want to walk out on a starry night and say, Dad has joined the cosmos. So we have truck drivers, we have restaurant owners, we have pilots, we have retired military, we have suicide victims, we've served people from well over 30 nations so far. And it's really a pretty broad spectrum of folks. And I think it also reflects the fact that we can actually provide a really joyous, and that's a word you don't hear a lot with funeral services, closure for folks. So there's nothing like standing a few miles away from a giant rocket, knowing your mom is on board and seeing that liftoff. I tell people you never see as much high-fiving and cheering at a funeral as you do at one of our events.
Fair enough. I never thought about it that way, but yeah, that would be a great celebration for them there. So for your clients then, do you find them? Do you guys go out? Are you doing like trade shows and stuff, or do the clients find you? How does that connection happen?
Sure, it's mostly people finding us. In the early days, we were so unique that whenever we did a launch, we'd get around 1 billion media impressions and tons of people covering us, and we use that to drive people, if you will, to our website. Now that we're 17 missions down the road, it's still interesting to folks, but we do everything that everybody else does. We do social media on several platforms. We do search, we do pay-per-click. We also are served through our funeral service providers, the funeral homes. We're in over 3,500 funeral homes in the US alone, where people walk in, perhaps generally not even knowing that we exist or that there's an option to choose us for DNA or for cremation. And they're presented with the concept there in the arrangement room. And a certain percentage of those folks look at it and say, oh, priced at half the cost of a traditional funeral. That sounds really cool. And so we meet them that way also.
Oh, nice. So they're getting that double value there of something unique, a good way to honor somebody, that big send off, and then maybe the price being a little bit less than a regular one. If they were to go into the funeral home, and I guess a lot of the people probably listening might have been in a funeral home and seen your guys' stuff sitting on their displays there, sat down with the funeral director and gone through it. How does the whole process then happen? If I said, this is something I want to do, I want to send my DNA or I want to send my mom's ashes to space, what would be the next steps then? How does that process look? What's the timeline? How long does it take?
Sure. Well, once you've decided that you want to contract with us and sign a contract, which is e-delivered, then we send what we call a flight sampling kit. And that's either a DNA kit that is provided by our partners, Genetic Health, or a way to collect a small portion of ashes that we send out. So the family then returns the kit to us. We store those either DNA samples or ashes samples in a safe deposit box, several safe deposit boxes that are held basically until about 90 to 120 days before a scheduled launch. At that point, we bring the ashes, we have a licensed funeral director, and we transfer them from the container we receive them in into a flight capsule. And our flight capsules range in size from essentially a fat watch battery to a lipstick container, depending upon how much you send. Those capsules are then permanently sealed, configured, and we deliver those capsules to whoever our service provider is, a satellite company, a rocket company, whoever it is. They integrate them onto the launch vehicle. And then at that point, you sit back and wait for the cue of the launch. And about generally 2 to 3 weeks before the launch, we'll let our families know the launch date. We run a 3-day event at the launch where on day 1 you arrive and you meet everybody else, have dinner with an astronaut. Then day 2, you tour the launch pad and we have a non-sectarian memorial service, which people just talked about their loved one and why they've chosen this service for them. And then day 3 is the launch, and we always pull together a private site for viewing the launch, even though sometimes it's within a public site, but an area where everybody can gather and see the launch live. After that, they go home and track it on the website.
Oh, well, so it is definitely more of an event than just than just launching it there, and the families are getting a lot more out of it than what, when I first thought you're launching it and that was it, not the
Right.
3-day event. And
Yeah, it's really an experience. And for those who choose not to or can't attend it, we webcast everything that we do. So you just go online at the appropriate time and you can speak at the memorial service. You can't really have dinner with the astronaut, but you can attend the launch virtually, which we had to do at our most recent launch in January from Florida because it was COVID time. So we did essentially 4 hours of live streaming the day before and 4 hours of live streaming during the launch. So it is, I mean, there's two elements to the service. There's destination. I want to go to space. I want to go to the moon. But there's also experience, and it can be a shared experience. It can be, we invite people to bring as many family members to the launch or to log on with whoever wants to come. And I think in that way, it's much more complete than just, oh, we sent you the ashes and we tell you guys, hey, we launched them. That's, some people, very few people don't want to be involved in the final journey. And so we've found over the years that providing that experience is really a key and compelling component of what we do.
Well, it definitely sounds like you had the technology in base before the pandemic hit, which is wonderful for families being able to connect and be a part of this memorial. Were there any other major changes that happened at Celestis during the pandemic or that year where it seems like everything was sort of turned on its head, especially in the funeral industry?
Yeah. Well, people didn't go to funeral homes. People would make arrangements remotely. And so that's really been the only impact, is that some of our funeral home providers weren't able to introduce as many people to the service. But we've had continuous growth even during the last year in terms of not only the number of folks selecting us, and we also offer pre-arrangement. So people can choose the service, put their money in a trust account, which they own, and know that when it's their time, they're going to go where they think they're going to go. And they've taken the burden off the families for having to arrange all this and what have you. So really, we were not hugely impacted other than our company, worked remotely, but thank goodness for, Zoom and the internet and everything else.
so then, Charles, what would you say would be on the horizon for Celestis?
I think it's mostly now continuing to offer an excellent service. I mean, that really, at the end of the day, when we first started the business, I come out of the space side of things. And so I thought, well, we'll just, if you will, box up people's remains and send them into space. But I learned early on that we're really a grief counseling company as much as we are anything else. So continuing to learn about that and offering that service. We'll continue to grow into other launch service providers so that we can fly. So far, we've flown from the Canary Islands, from Kwajalein Atoll, from California, from New Mexico and Florida. But the space industry is really growing fast, and there are a number of different launch providers and different launch sites. So we'll continue to offer the best opportunities for people to choose a convenient service, if you will. Of course, we're looking forward to our first deep space mission, and we think we'll do more and more of those because people really like the notion of, as I say, essentially becoming another planet for eternity. And that gets easier as the launch services. And I suppose one day, probably after my time, as humans start living on Mars and other places, there's going to be a need for Celestis services in multiplanetary. And of course, we think we'll be there. We're the pioneer, and we always intend to be the iconic provider of the service.
So if you had any listeners listening in right now that you would like to get any message across, is there anything you want to tell them?
Just that you're in good hands with us. We've been doing this for 27 years. We've done 17 missions. We really focus on making our service compassionate and caring. And we think we do a good job at it. Most of our staff has been with us for more than a decade. And so you're really, if you choose Celestis, you really have a lot of trust and a lot of comfort, I think, in making that choice. We do a very good job of handling your precious cargo.
All right, well, thank you very much for your time and stopping on, Charles. We really, really appreciate it. Thank you for the listeners at home listening in. Once again, this was Funeral DNA, the podcast where we analyze the unique components, trends, innovations, and services that make up the funeral industry, or as we call it, Funeral DNA. Stay tuned next week where we bring in a new guest speaker. Thank you.
Thank you.